John had always felt like something was missing in his life. He had been married to Sarah for 5 years, but the relationship had become strained over time. They started out full of hope and dreams, but as the years went on, communication between them broke down. Arguments became more frequent, and their once strong bond seemed to fade with each passing day. John often felt that he needed space, that the constant tension was too much to bear. He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when he started feeling disconnected from Sarah, but he knew deep down that their marriage wasn't the way it used to be. He felt trapped in a life that wasn't fulfilling, and he longed for something more, something that would make him feel alive again. One evening, after yet another heated argument, John made a decision. It was a difficult one, but he thought it was the only way he could regain his peace of mind. He told Sarah that he wanted to leave. He needed space, he said. He needed to figure things out on his own. He didn't want to continue living like this, unsure of the future, surrounded by constant conflict. Sarah, devastated by his words, tried to convince him to stay, but John was firm in his decision. He packed his things, left their home, and moved into a small apartment in the city. It was a lonely existence, but he convinced himself that it was what was best for both of them. At first, John thought that leaving Sarah would bring him relief, but as the weeks went by, he began to realize how much he missed her. There were moments when he regretted his decision, but the pride inside him kept him from reaching out. He didn't want to admit that he had made a mistake. Life outside of his marriage wasn't what he expected either. John tried to distract himself by spending time with friends, going out, and focusing on his career, but the emptiness still lingered. He spent many nights lying awake in his apartment, his mind racing with thoughts of what could have been, and what might still be. One day, as John sat in a coffee shop, reflecting on his life, he realized that he missed being part of a family. He missed the warmth of Sarah's smile, the quiet moments they shared together, and even the challenges they faced as a couple. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He wanted to go back. But there was something that John didn't know yet. Sarah's life had continued without him, and there were changes ahead that neither of them had anticipated. Changes that would turn John's life upside down in a way he could never have imagined. As John thought about the future, he made up his mind. He would return to Sarah. He wanted to make things right. Little did he know, the story wasn't over yet. There were surprises waiting for him that would change everything, and he would soon discover that life had a much bigger plan for him than he could have ever expected. This is where John's journey truly begins, a journey that would lead him to a place he never thought possible, filled with love, responsibility, and a new sense of purpose. Weeks passed, and John's desire to return to Sarah only grew stronger. He began making plans to go back, hoping that the distance between them had given them both time to reflect and heal. He thought about how he could apologize, make up for the mistakes he had made, and rebuild the trust that had been broken. As much as he longed to fix things, he wasn't sure where to start. It had been a difficult decision to leave, and he knew it wouldn't be easy to come back, but he was determined to try. One afternoon, as he was heading out for a walk, John's phone rang. It was Sarah. He hesitated for a moment before answering, unsure of what to expect. After all, they hadn't spoken much since he left. "John," Sarah's voice came through, sounding a bit shaky. "I have some news." John's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "with quadruplets." John was silent for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. Quadruplets. He couldn't believe it. The shock of the news left him speechless. He had left Sarah months ago, and now she was telling him that she was expecting 4 children. It was hard for him to wrap his head around the idea. I don't know what to say," John finally managed to say, his voice filled with disbelief. "How is that possible?" Sarah sighed. "I don't know, John, but it's happening. I'm going to have 4 babies." John's mind raced. This wasn't how he imagined things turning out. He had left Sarah thinking that their lives would go in separate directions. And now, here she was, carrying 4 children. He felt a mixture of guilt, confusion, and, strangely, excitement. He didn't know what to do with this new information. He could hear the stress in Sarah's voice, but also a sense of determination. She wasn't asking for his help, but John knew that he couldn't just walk away from this. These children were his too, and no matter what had happened between him and Sarah, he felt responsible. "I'm coming over," he said, without thinking. "We need to talk. I need to be there for you, for the kids." Sarah was quiet for a moment, clearly surprised by his decision. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes," John replied. "I've been thinking about this, and I want to be there. I'll be there for you and the kids." It wasn't the perfect solution, and it wasn't going to be easy, but John knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to abandon his children. This was his responsibility, and even though it scared him, he was ready to face it. As John hung up the phone, a sense of purpose washed over him. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew that he couldn't turn away now. The life he had left behind was calling him back, and this time, he wasn't going to make the same mistake. His world had just been turned upside down, and he was ready to face whatever came next. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test his strength, his love, and his commitment in ways he had never imagined. And though he wasn't sure of everything that lay ahead, John was determined to embrace it. The quadruplets had already begun to change his life, and he was ready to welcome them into the world. John arrived at Sarah's house the next day, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never expected his life to take this kind of turn. Walking up to the door, he was filled with a mixture of nervousness and determination. He had a lot to apologize for, and he knew that rebuilding their relationship wouldn't be easy. But the thought of being there for Sarah, especially now that she was carrying their quadruplets, gave him a new sense of responsibility. When Sarah opened the door, she looked surprised to see him. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She was visibly pregnant, and the sight of it made John's heart ache. This was real. 4 babies. His babies. "I didn't expect you to come back," Sarah finally said, her voice soft but uncertain. "I know," John replied. "I'm sorry for leaving. I know it was a mistake, but I'm here now, and I want to make things right." Sarah stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The house was quiet, and John could feel the tension between them. He wasn't sure what to say, but he knew he had to start somewhere. "Sarah, I know I hurt you when I left," John began, his voice full of regret. "I've had time to think, and I realize now how wrong I was. I didn't understand what I had until I lost it. I'm not asking for forgiveness right away, but I want you to know that I'm here to help, to support you and the babies." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "I don't know if I can just forget what happened, John," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I appreciate that you're willing to be here for me now." John nodded, understanding her hesitation. He had hurt her deeply, and he knew it would take time to heal those wounds. But seeing Sarah like this, carrying their children, made him realize how much he had taken for granted. He had been selfish when he walked away, thinking that leaving would solve his problems. But now, it was clear that he had just created new ones he had to face head-on. Over the next few days, John and Sarah talked more about their past, their mistakes, and their hopes for the future. John tried to be patient, listening to Sarah's feelings and offering his support. He could see how much she had changed since he left, and he admired her strength. Sarah had always been independent, but now she was a mother-to-be, carrying 4 children. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Sarah looked at him with a mixture of sadness and hope in her eyes. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," she said quietly. "I know this is a lot for you, and I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm not going anywhere," John replied firmly. "I'm here for the long haul. I want to be part of this family. For you and the kids." Sarah smiled faintly, her expression softening. "I hope you mean that, John." "I do," he said, feeling a sense of determination settle in his chest. "I may have left once, but I won't make that mistake again." As John looked at Sarah, her pregnant belly growing with their quadruplets, he knew that his life had changed forever. The challenges ahead would be difficult, but he was ready to face them. Being there for Sarah and their children was the right thing to do. And no matter how hard it got, John was determined to be the man he should have been all along. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, and John was ready to face it with an open heart, ready to rebuild his family one step at a time. As the days passed, John settled back into Sarah's life, but everything felt different. Their relationship wasn't the same as it once had been. The past was still there, lingering in the air between them. Yet, John could feel the weight of the future pressing down on him. He wasn't just here for Sarah anymore. He was here for their children. 4 new lives that would soon need love, care, and attention. John spent the next few weeks getting to know the rhythms of Sarah's life. She was tired, more than she ever had been, but she was also strong, and John admired her more with each passing day. He did his best to be there for her, helping with household chores, running errands, and attending doctor's appointments. But most of all, he tried to be present, to be a partner in every sense of the word. Sarah didn't ask for a lot. She didn't need John to fix everything. What she needed was someone to share the burden, someone to help make the heavy moments a little lighter. And John was more than willing to do that, even though he knew it wouldn't be easy. One afternoon, Sarah had a doctor's appointment, and John decided to go with her. He had missed too many important moments in their relationship, and he wasn't going to let that happen again. At the clinic, they sat together in the waiting room, silently holding hands. Sarah had always been independent, and now she was carrying 4 children, a responsibility that no one should have to face alone. When they were called into the doctor's office, John sat by her side, ready for the ultrasound. As the doctor began, Sarah squeezed his hand tightly, her eyes focused on the screen. John watched, heart racing, as the images of their babies appeared. 4 little hearts beating, 4 tiny bodies moving in perfect synchronicity. Tears welled up in John's eyes as he saw the babies on the screen. They were real. This wasn't a dream or a fantasy. These were his children, his responsibility. He was a father, and he couldn't believe how much he had missed by leaving Sarah behind. "You're going to be a great dad," the doctor said with a smile. John turned to Sarah, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry for everything I've done," he said softly, his voice full of regret. "But I want to be here for you and for them. I want to be the father they deserve." Sarah's eyes softened as she looked at him. She didn't say anything at first. Instead, she just squeezed his hand tighter, a silent acknowledgement that she heard him. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. It was the beginning of something new. Over the next few days, John kept his promise. He helped Sarah set up the nursery, picking out furniture and baby clothes. They made lists of names and planned for the future, despite the uncertainty that hung over them. John knew that he couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when Sarah was frustrated and moments when John felt overwhelmed. But the more time he spent with Sarah, the more he realized that he wanted this. He wanted to be a family. He wanted to raise their children together. In the quiet moments, as they sat side by side, waiting for the babies to arrive, John understood that everything he had wanted before, freedom, independence, was nothing compared to what he had now. He had been given a second chance, not just to make things right with Sarah, but to become the father and partner he had always hoped to be. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, John felt hopeful. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face it with Sarah and their children. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that was full of love, promise, and the chance to start over. The weeks passed quickly, and soon Sarah was nearing the end of her pregnancy. John found himself becoming more and more excited about becoming a father, but he was also nervous. He was determined to be a good partner to Sarah, but he knew that having 4 babies would come with challenges. Every day felt like a new lesson in patience and responsibility. As the due date approached, John focused on helping Sarah prepare for the baby's arrival. They worked together to set up the nursery, choosing colors for the walls and arranging the cribs. John had never thought much about things like decorating a nursery, but now, as he worked alongside Sarah, he felt more connected to her and her growing family. One afternoon, Sarah was feeling particularly tired. She had spent the morning cleaning, and now she was sitting on the couch, resting. John sat beside her, looking at her with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. Sarah smiled weakly. "Just tired. It's a lot to carry around 4 babies." John nodded, understanding the physical strain Sarah was going through. He had seen how hard she worked to take care of herself and prepare for the babies, but he knew there was only so much one person could do. "I'm here," John said, his voice full of sincerity. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this easier for you. I'm not going anywhere." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her expression softening. "Thank you, John," she said quietly. "I know I can't do this alone." John had learned that being there for Sarah was about more than just helping with the physical tasks. It was about offering emotional support, listening when she needed to talk, and being a partner in every sense of the word. He had realized that he couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future, one step at a time. As the days grew warmer, Sarah's belly continued to grow, and John found himself feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. The thought of the babies arriving soon was both thrilling and overwhelming. He was ready to meet them, to hold them, to be a father. But he also knew there would be sleepless nights, long days, and plenty of challenges ahead. One evening, after a long day of preparing for the babies, John and Sarah sat together on the couch, enjoying a rare moment of quiet. Sarah leaned her head on John's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. "We're going to do this together, right?" Sarah asked softly, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "Together," John replied, squeezing her gently. "We'll face whatever comes our way. I promise." Sarah smiled, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm glad you're here, John. I didn't know if I could do this on my own." John kissed her forehead. "You don't have to. We're in this together." As they sat together, watching the sunset through the window, John couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. There was still uncertainty ahead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face the future. He knew that being a father wouldn't be easy, but with Sarah by his side, he believed they could overcome anything. The birth of their quadruplets was fast approaching, and John was determined to be the father they deserved. He had a second chance to make things right with Sarah, and he wasn't going to waste it. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would be there every step of the way, ready to embrace fatherhood and the new family they were creating. The day Sarah had been waiting for had finally arrived. It was early in the morning when she felt the first signs that the babies were coming. She had known this moment would come soon, but now that it was here, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had been carrying the quadruplets for months, and now it was time to meet them. John was by her side, as he had promised. He had been with her through every step of the pregnancy, offering his support and love. He knew this would be a huge change, but he was ready to face it head-on, with Sarah beside him. "Are you sure it's time?" John asked, his voice full of concern. He didn't want to rush her, but he knew they needed to get to the hospital quickly. Sarah nodded, her face determined. "It's time," she said. "We've been waiting for this moment." John quickly helped her into the car, his hands shaking slightly as he started the engine. He was excited, but also filled with worry. This was a big step for their family, and he wanted to make sure Sarah and the babies were going to be okay. The hospital was only a short drive away, but it felt like forever. As they arrived, the staff immediately took charge, guiding them to a room and preparing for the birth. John stayed by Sarah's side, holding her hand and comforting her as much as he could. Hours seemed to pass in a blur as the doctors worked to bring the babies into the world. John watched, amazed by Sarah's strength. He had always known she was tough, but seeing her go through this was something else entirely. She was determined to do this for their children, no matter how difficult it was. Finally, the moment came. The sound of a baby's cry filled the room, followed by another and another. John could hardly believe it when he heard the fourth cry. His heart swelled with love and pride. These were his children, and they were here. The doctors cleaned the babies and placed them in Sarah's arms. John leaned down to kiss her forehead, tears of happiness welling in his eyes. The babies were perfect, each one healthy and beautiful. He couldn't believe they were finally here. The next few days in the hospital were a whirlwind. John and Sarah barely slept, taking turns caring for the babies. They were exhausted but filled with joy. Their family had grown, and it felt like the start of something new, something special. John had always wanted to be a father, but he never imagined it would come with so much love and responsibility. He had learned so much during Sarah's pregnancy, about patience, about partnership, and about the strength of family. He knew the journey ahead would be challenging, but it didn't matter. He was ready. He was a father now, and he was determined to give his children the best life possible. With Sarah by his side, they would face every challenge together. As they looked at their 4 little ones, John realized that the family they had always dreamed of was now a reality. The road to this moment hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Their future was full of love, hope, and the promise of many more moments like this. It was just the beginning. As the days passed, John and Sarah began to adjust to their new life as parents of quadruplets. The hospital had been a blur of busy nurses, doctors, and visitors. But now, back at home, they faced the quiet chaos of daily life with their 4 little ones. Their small house, once filled with silence, was now alive with the sounds of babies crying, cooing, and giggling. The first few weeks were the hardest. Both John and Sarah had to learn how to juggle everything. Feeding time was never easy. Every 3 hours, all 4 babies needed to be fed, changed, and comforted. The house was always filled with bottles, diapers, and baby clothes scattered everywhere. John had to admit, he hadn't expected it to be this hard. But as overwhelming as it was, there was something magical about it. Watching each baby grow and develop was a joy John had never imagined. He marveled at the way their tiny fingers curled around his hand and how their little eyes seemed to take in the world around them. Every milestone, no matter how small, was a cause for celebration. John had to give up many of the things he had once taken for granted, like sleeping through the night and having uninterrupted time to himself. But he didn't mind. Every smile, every coo from his babies made it all worth it. He found himself waking up in the middle of the night, not out of obligation, but because he couldn't wait to hold his babies and watch them sleep peacefully in his arms. One afternoon, after a particularly long night of feeding and caring for the babies, John sat down on the couch, exhausted. Sarah joined him, holding 2 of the babies in her arms. "We're doing it, John," she said with a tired smile. "We're making it through, day by day." John looked at her, his heart swelling with love. "I never imagined how much work this would be, but I wouldn't trade it for anything," he said softly. "They're amazing, Sarah. Our family is amazing." Sarah smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I know. It's been hard, but look at them. Look at our beautiful family." John couldn't help but agree. The babies had brought a new light into his life, one he never could have expected. Though they were still learning how to handle the challenges of parenthood, he knew they were stronger together. He wasn't the same man he had been when he left Sarah all those months ago. Being a father had changed him in ways he couldn't fully understand, but he was determined to be the father his children deserved. The future was still unknown, and there would be more sleepless nights, tough decisions, and obstacles to overcome. But John no longer feared those challenges. He knew that, no matter what, he had his family by his side. They had made it through the hardest parts, and now they were ready for whatever the future would bring. For John, it was no longer about just being a father. It was about being a husband, a partner, and a provider for the family they had built together. And he was more than ready to face the future, because this family was everything he had ever wanted. The love, the laughter, and the joy they shared filled him with hope. Their new beginning had only just begun. Months had passed since the birth of the quadruplets, and John and Sarah were slowly finding their rhythm as parents. The house, though still chaotic at times, now felt like home in a way it never had before. The sound of babies laughing and crying had replaced the silence, filling the rooms with life and warmth. John couldn't believe how much his life had changed. The man who once felt lost and uncertain now had a clear purpose. His children had opened his eyes to a love deeper than anything he had ever known. There were still sleepless nights, overwhelming moments, and challenges, but he faced them with a heart full of gratitude. He no longer saw his children as a burden. He saw them as a gift. Sarah, too, had grown into her new role as a mother. The first few months had been difficult for her, with the demands of raising 4 babies, but she had proven to herself and to John how strong she truly was. Though there were days when she felt exhausted, she never lost her sense of determination. She had learned to balance everything, with John's support beside her every step of the way. Together, they made a great team. They split the responsibilities, feeding, diaper changes, and the countless other tasks that came with raising 4 infants. Even though it was challenging, they found comfort in knowing they were in it together. John made it a point to never leave Sarah alone in the chaos. Whether it was helping with the babies or simply taking a moment to talk, he made sure she knew he was there. As the babies began to grow, John and Sarah started to see their personalities shine through. Each one was unique, with their own little quirks. There was Noah, the quiet one who always seemed to be thinking deeply, and Ella, who was full of energy and always smiling. Then there was Lucas, who loved to laugh, and Olivia, who was the most curious of them all, always reaching for new things. It was amazing to watch them develop, and every new milestone made John and Sarah feel more connected to one another. One evening, as they sat on the couch with the babies, John turned to Sarah with a smile. "I can't believe how far we've come," he said softly, his eyes full of love. "When I first left, I never imagined this. I thought I was running toward something better, but I didn't know what I was leaving behind. Now, I can't imagine life without them, or you." Sarah smiled back, her heart full. "I know. It's been a roller coaster, but I'm glad you came back. These babies, they've brought something into our lives that I never expected. It's more than I could have hoped for." John kissed her forehead, feeling a deep sense of peace. He had made mistakes in the past, but now, with Sarah and their children, he felt like he had finally found his place in the world. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be new challenges, more learning, and moments of doubt. But John and Sarah were no longer 2 individuals trying to figure things out on their own. They were a family, united by love, and nothing could break that bond. Looking at his children, John knew that they had all created something beautiful together, a life filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was all that mattered. As the babies fell asleep, John and Sarah sat together, side by side, watching them. They didn't need to say anything. They both knew that no matter what came next, they would face it as a family. With hope for the future, they looked ahead, knowing that together they could take on whatever life had in store. Their story was only just beginning.